Carl Jung spent decades studying rare individuals who possessed traits so unusual that society couldn't understand them. He called these people psychologically ahead of their time. These aren't just gifted people. These are individuals marked by 7 specific signs that Jung believed separated the chosen ones from everyone else. Do you have any of these marks? Jung discovered something that still makes psychologists uncomfortable today. Some people are born with a level of awareness that makes them dangerous to collective unconscious systems. Not dangerous because they're violent, but dangerous because they see through every illusion that holds groups together. Today, I'll reveal the 7 marks Jung identified, and by the end, you'll know if you're one of them. These 7 marks aren't gifts at first. They're burdens that lead to isolation, exhaustion, and psychological danger. Jung spent years documenting patients who possessed these traits, and what he discovered changed everything we know about human consciousness. The marks appear in people who can't fit into normal society no matter how hard they try. And there's a reason for that. Let's start with the first mark, the one Jung called the most dangerous of all. People with advanced perception don't just notice more details than others. Their brains process unconscious information that most people completely miss. Jung documented this ability across multiple patients in his Zurich clinic during his decades of practice. They could walk into any room and immediately sense who was lying, who was in pain, and who harbored secret resentments. This wasn't guessing. This was reading micro-expressions and unconscious signals with startling accuracy that Jung verified through careful questioning. Jung called this differentiated intuition. It's when someone's perceptive abilities become so refined that they detect psychological patterns invisible to everyone else. They see the depression behind forced smiles. They sense the desperation beneath confident presentations. They feel the collective shadow that groups unconsciously agree to ignore. They know when someone's lying, not because of logical deduction, but because their unconscious mind processes thousands of data points simultaneously and delivers conclusions that feel like gut instinct. This creates what Jung termed the problem of the superior function, when your greatest strength becomes your greatest burden because it separates you from normal human connection. Think about what this means practically. You're at a dinner party and everyone's laughing at someone's jokes, but you can see the person telling jokes is masking profound sadness. You sense the couple in the corner is headed for divorce, even though they're holding hands. You feel the tension between 2 friends that nobody else has noticed yet. Here's where it gets disturbing. These individuals can't engage in small talk because they see through every social mask. When someone asks, "How are you?" they don't just hear the words. They see the exhaustion, sense the desperation, feel the performance happening. The disconnect between surface conversation and underlying reality becomes unbearable. They can't maintain friendships because people feel exposed and uncomfortable around them. Even when they say nothing, their presence creates unease. Friends start avoiding them without quite knowing why. Invitations stop coming, not because of anything the perceptive person did wrong, but because their consciousness makes others uncomfortable with their own unconsciousness. They can't hold employment because their presence disrupts the collective agreements that keep groups functioning smoothly. Every workplace has unspoken rules about what gets acknowledged and what gets ignored. The person with differentiated perception can't play along. Their inability to pretend disrupts the social contracts that make organizations functional. Jung realized he wasn't treating pathology. He was observing what happens when consciousness becomes too advanced for social survival. His patients weren't mentally ill. They were psychologically evolved beyond what their environments could tolerate. But this ability comes at a terrible cost. The more clearly someone sees, the more isolated they become. Jung wrote about this extensively. When one person perceives what others cannot or will not see, They become a mirror that society refuses to look into. This is why the first mark feels like a curse rather than a blessing. Superior perception without proper integration destroys the person who possesses it. The second mark separates those who merely feel deeply from those who've transformed their sensitivity into strategic intelligence. Jung discovered something revolutionary about empaths that society still doesn't understand. Their emotional overwhelm isn't weakness. It's a sophisticated data processing system that most people never learn to use consciously. These individuals spent years absorbing everyone else's pain, family dysfunction, relationship betrayals, workplace manipulation. They became what Jung called emotional shock absorbers for their entire social system. Every family member's unexpressed rage, every friend's unprocessed trauma, every colleague's hidden resentment, all of it flowing into the empath's energy field. But here's what made Jung's research so disturbing. These empaths weren't just enduring abuse, they were studying it. When Jung asked them to describe their relationships, he expected scattered thoughts from damaged minds. He anticipated the typical presentations of trauma patients: confusion, dissociation, fragmented narratives. What he discovered changed. Empaths aren't broken, they're alchemists in progress. The Alchemist's Path gives you drills, Jung-based boundaries, and 3 exclusive chapter videos to turn overwhelm into clarity. By Surreal Mind, 236-page downloadable ebook, in stock. Begin now at thesurrealmind.com. His understanding of empathic intelligence forever. His patients had kept detailed mental records of every person who hurt them, not just surface memories, but deep psychological profiles. They knew their abusers' triggers, insecurities, and deepest fears. They understood the childhood wounds driving adult behavior. They had mapped emotional patterns with surgical precision. They could predict reactions before situations unfolded. They knew exactly which words would devastate and which actions would trigger maximum defensive response. Jung found that empaths transform from victims into strategists through one critical shift. They stop seeing their sensitivity as a flaw and start recognizing it as advanced pattern recognition. Their minds aren't victim diaries, they're war rooms filled with data about human behavior. Every interaction has been catalogued, every manipulation tactic has been identified, every psychological game has been documented with clinical precision. The empath, who integrates this mark, becomes what Jung called a psychological genius in hiding. Someone with both the sensitivity to feel everything and the wisdom to choose what deserves their energy. They haven't lost their capacity for compassion. They've gained the strategic intelligence to protect that compassion from those who would exploit it. This transformation doesn't happen gradually. It happens through one explosive moment, Jung termed shadow integration under extreme duress, usually triggered by profound betrayal from someone they completely trusted. The empath who possesses this second mark has moved beyond unconscious absorption. They've become consciously strategic with their remarkable gifts. The third mark appears when someone becomes a target for everyone else's denied darkness. Jung extensively documented what he called shadow projection. When people with clear perception reflect back what others refuse to acknowledge about themselves, they become scapegoats for collective unconscious content. This isn't occasional misunderstanding. This is systematic targeting by unconscious psychological forces that operate beneath rational awareness. Here's how this mark reveals itself. The person observes obvious dysfunction in a group. Maybe they gently mention that someone seems troubled, or point out a clear problem everyone's ignoring. The observation is accurate. The concern is genuine. The problem is real and visible to anyone willing to look. Instead of appreciation for their insight, they get attacked for being negative or creating drama. Family members turn on them. Colleagues exclude them. Friends ghost them, all for simply naming what everyone already knows but refuses to acknowledge. Jung realized this wasn't coincidence. This was psychological defense operating at collective levels. People would rather destroy the mirror than examine what's being reflected. The unconscious mind has two choices when confronted with its own shadow content: integrate the shadow or attack the mirror. Most people choose to attack. It's psychologically easier to blame the messenger than face uncomfortable truths about yourself. Jung observed this pattern repeatedly in his clinical work over decades. His patients with differentiated perception were consistently blamed for problems they merely observed. When they expressed concern about relationship issues, they were accused of manufacturing conflict. When they sensed hidden resentments in families, they were labeled troublemakers. When they noticed workplace dysfunction, they were called toxic. The accusations always followed the same pattern: projection of responsibility onto the person with clarity. Jung called this the scapegoat phenomenon. Highly perceptive individuals become designated problems in every group they enter, not because they cause issues, but because they reveal problems already existing in collective consciousness. They become living reminders of what the group wants to forget, walking embodiments of denied shadow content, human mirrors reflecting back what collective consciousness refuses to see. This mark is particularly dangerous because it operates through collective possession. One person's projection can spread to an entire group, creating what Jung termed reality distortion fields. Soon everyone sees the perceptive individual through the same distorted lens. The person finds themselves isolated and gaslit by forces they can't rationally explain. They become repositories for everything the group cannot consciously acknowledge about itself. The fourth mark is what Jung called participation mystique. This describes individuals whose psychic apparatus is so finely tuned that they absorb not just conscious communications, but the entire unconscious atmosphere of their environment. These people don't just feel emotions deeply, they lose the ability to distinguish between their own feelings and those they've unconsciously absorbed from others. This creates genuine danger of identity dissolution that Jung documented across multiple cases. Jung documented patients who would walk into rooms and immediately become flooded with everyone else's emotional content. They'd attend family gatherings feeling fine, then leave emotionally destroyed, carrying everyone else's unprocessed psychological material. They'd go to work meetings and absorb the collective anxiety of the entire team. Jung observed them experiencing depression that wasn't theirs, anxiety that belonged to someone else, and rage that had been projected into their energy field by others. The terrifying part is that this absorption happens completely unconsciously. The person doesn't choose to take on others' emotions. Their nervous system automatically attunes to surrounding psychological fields. After years of this, they can no longer locate their authentic feelings beneath layers of absorbed material. This mark creates what Jung termed the complete loss of individual identity in favor of collective possession. Boundaries dissolve to the point where people can't locate their own authentic psychological voice beneath all the absorbed material. They become so merged with their environment's unconscious contents that their personality fragments under the weight of external psychological pressure. Jung emphasized that without learning to differentiate what belongs to them versus what they've absorbed, these individuals face psychological annihilation. The fifth mark identifies individuals who can forecast psychological disasters before they manifest. Jung called these people thinking intuitives. They possess an uncanny ability to perceive logical conclusions of unconscious processes that others cannot yet see. These individuals can predict relationship failures, career disasters, and personal breakdowns months before they occur. Not through analysis, but through pattern recognition, operating at unconscious levels. Jung documented cases where patients would warn family members about impending problems, only to be dismissed as pessimistic or negative. Then exactly what they predicted would unfold, often with devastating consequences. A patient would tell her sister that her marriage was heading toward divorce. The sister would dismiss this as jealousy or negativity. 6 months later, the divorce papers would be filed. Another patient would warn a colleague that his career trajectory was unsustainable. The colleague would laugh it off. Within a year, burnout would force him out of the industry entirely. This creates profound frustration. The person sees disasters approaching, but cannot convince anyone to take preventive action. Their foresight goes unheeded, which confirms their isolation and reinforces why they're different from everyone around them. They're like people watching a car crash in slow motion while everyone else sees smooth highway. Ahead, they shout warnings that nobody hears until impact validates what they saw all along. This mark operates through what Jung termed unconscious pattern recognition. The thinking intuitive doesn't consciously calculate outcomes. Their psyche processes behavioral data at speeds that bypass rational thought, arriving at conclusions about future events that later prove startlingly accurate. They see how current patterns will inevitably unfold based on psychological laws most people don't understand. This ability separates them from collective consciousness because they live partially in future timelines that others cannot perceive. The sixth mark explains why highly conscious individuals can't maintain normal relationships even when they're kind and loving. Jung discovered that their existence threatens collective agreements upon which social cohesion depends. When someone sees through shared illusions that hold groups together, they become destabilizing forces. Organizations, families, and societies function partly through collective unconscious agreements about what will and won't be acknowledged. Every family has unspoken rules. We don't talk about dad's drinking. We pretend mum's not depressed. We act like everything's fine even when everyone knows it isn't. Every workplace has similar contracts. We ignore the toxic manager. We pretend the company values align with actions. We participate in meetings where everyone knows decisions were made beforehand. These agreements aren't conscious conspiracies. They're unconscious contracts that emerge naturally to reduce psychological tension. The highly perceptive individual inadvertently violates these agreements simply by existing authentically. They can't pretend not to see what's obvious to them. They can't participate in collective denial about dysfunctional patterns. Their presence alone threatens the psychological contracts that keep groups comfortable. Jung observed this created what he termed the problem of superior function. The individual's greatest psychological strength becomes the source of their greatest suffering. This mark manifests as chronic social rejection that the person cannot understand. They're not aggressive, manipulative, or cruel. Yet people instinctively avoid them or push them out of groups. Friends stop inviting them to gatherings. Family members exclude them from important decisions. Colleagues freeze them out of informal networks. Jung realized this wasn't personal rejection. It was collective unconscious self-protection. Groups unconsciously recognize that this person's awareness will force conscious acknowledgement of contents the collective prefers to keep buried. The marked individual becomes exiled, not for bad behavior, but for threatening psychological equilibrium through their clarity. The seventh and most subtle mark involves what Jung called the compulsion to repeat. Unlike the other marks, which involve heightened awareness, this one reveals individuals unconsciously orchestrating the same painful patterns while believing themselves victims of fate. They consistently recreate identical situations with different people, following surprisingly similar scripts each time. Jung documented this as negative synchronicity, the unconscious ability to attract precisely those who will help perpetuate unresolved psychological dramas. The danger isn't just that these individuals suffer repeatedly, it's that they unconsciously recruit others into their dramas. Without realizing it, you can find yourself playing a role in someone's psychological story that began long before you met them, usually the role of betrayer, abandoner, or persecutor. Jung observed this pattern creating cascading damage through social systems as unintegrated individuals pulled others into their repetitive cycles. This mark separates those who are merely unlucky from those who are unconscious architects of their own recurring suffering. The person genuinely feels surprised each time the pattern repeats, never recognizing their role in orchestrating familiar scenarios. Jung emphasized that until this mark is consciously integrated, the individual remains trapped in psychological loops that destroy relationships and prevent authentic development. Now comes the critical question. If you possess these marks, what determines whether they destroy you or transform you into what Jung believed humanity needs? Everything depends on integration. Jung developed what he called the individuation process, specifically for people carrying these 7 marks. Without conscious integration, the marks become psychological time bombs ticking toward inevitable breakdown. With proper integration, they transform into evolutionary advantages that serve both individual and collective development. The first stage Jung termed recognition and differentiation. This means consciously learning to distinguish between authentic inner experience and unconsciously absorbed external content. It sounds simple, but requires rigorous psychological honesty that most people never develop. For those with the absorption mark, this requires daily solitude, allowing absorbed material to settle so they can recognize their own psychological voice. Jung taught patients to ask constantly, "Does this feeling belong to me, or did I absorb it from my environment?" This simple question begins the differentiation process. Stage 2 involves shadow integration. Jung discovered that people who see others' shadows clearly often haven't integrated their own. The more someone denies their capacity for manipulation, cruelty, or selfishness, the more disturbed they become seeing these qualities in others. Shadow integration means acknowledging that you contain every human quality you observe around you, not because you're bad, but because you're human. This doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you complete. Someone who can see clearly without judgment because they've accepted their own complexity. The third stage Jung called conscious participation. This is the ability to engage with others' psychological contents without being overwhelmed or losing individual identity. It requires developing what Jung termed psychological containers, the capacity to hold someone else's unconscious material temporarily while maintaining awareness that it's not your own. This allows the integrated person to serve as a bridge between conscious and unconscious, helping others without sacrificing psychological integrity. Jung emphasized these stages must happen in order. Trying to help others before completing your own integration leads to disaster. The person becomes flooded with psychological content they cannot process, resulting in breakdown rather than breakthrough. But those who complete all 3 stages become what Jung called consciousness pioneers, individuals whose psychological development precedes collective readiness, serving as advanced scouts for territories humanity will eventually need to explore. Here's what Jung discovered that can save those who carry these marks. The 7 signs aren't malfunctions. They're advanced features of consciousness development. You're not broken because you see everything others miss. You're psychologically ahead of your time. The danger isn't in possessing these marks. The danger is failing to develop conscious relationship with extraordinary abilities that most people will never understand. Jung studied historical figures to understand what separated successful integration from psychological collapse. He examined Nietzsche, whose superior perception led to breakdown because he never learned integration. Nietzsche possessed extraordinary insight into human nature. He could see through religious facades, social conventions, and philosophical pretensions with devastating clarity. But Nietzsche wielded his insights as weapons against society rather than using them constructively. Jung observed that Nietzsche remained identified with his superior function instead of integrating it into balanced personality. He became possessed by his own perceptiveness. His isolation and eventual collapse represented what happens when perception remains unintegrated. The mind sees too much, too clearly, without the personality structure to contain those insights. Contrast this with Meister Eckhart, whom Jung considered an example of successful integration. Eckhart possessed mystical intuition that allowed him to perceive spiritual and psychological realities others couldn't access. But unlike Nietzsche, Eckhart channeled insights into compassionate service. He transformed superior perception into wisdom that could nourish others without overwhelming them. Jung noted that Eckhart's success came from conscious humility, the recognition that superior perception is a gift to be shared wisely, not a weapon to be wielded. The difference between destruction and transformation comes down to one factor. Do you use your marks to attack the unconsciousness around you, or do you use them to serve consciousness evolution? Jung believed individuals who successfully integrate these marks become exactly what humanity needs. Not warriors against ignorance, but bridges helping collective consciousness evolve. They see what others cannot yet acknowledge, preparing humanity for developmental steps that are inevitable but not yet obvious. But integration requires more than individual work. Jung emphasized finding what he called the few who understand, others capable of engaging with differentiated consciousness without defensiveness. These relationships are rare but essential for psychological survival. With fellow integrated individuals, you can be completely authentic without fear of overwhelming or threatening them. They recognize you as members of what Jung termed the conscious minority. The 7 marks will either destroy you through isolation and overwhelm, or transform you into consciousness pioneers, serving humanity's psychological evolution. Your choice isn't whether you possess these marks. If you're reading this, you likely recognize yourself in Jung's descriptions. Your choice is whether you'll develop the integration skills necessary to transform dangerous perception into wisdom. Jung's individuation method offers the path from isolation to conscious service, from overwhelming perception to integrated clarity, from psychological curse to evolutionary contribution. You were born to see everything, not to suffer in silence, but to serve consciousness evolution. The world needs your insights delivered with integration, wisdom, and strategic awareness that transform dangerous perception into medicine for collective consciousness. Your gift is not your burden. Your unconscious relationship to your gift is your burden. Learn to integrate consciously, and you become exactly what Jung believed marked individuals were meant to be. Consciousness pioneers preparing humanity for psychological development that is inevitable but not yet obvious. The danger of possessing these 7 marks isn't that you see too much. It's that you might never learn to see with the integration and wisdom your gifts demand. Jung's most profound discovery wasn't that some people possess these marks. It's that those who integrate them consciously become forces of nature, not dangerous to innocent people, dangerous to systems that exploit consciousness itself. That's what the world needs more of. People who know their worth, trust their perceptions, and refuse to dim their light for anyone's comfort. If you recognize yourself in these 7 marks, share in the comments which mark resonates most powerfully with your experience. Your recognition helps others walking the same path know they're not alone in this journey. Subscribe for more insights into Jung's discoveries about consciousness development that transcends ordinary limitations. In The Alchemist's Path, perception training for empaths, you'll turn overwhelm into wisdom with practical drills, Jung-inspired boundaries, and step-by-step perception training. This guide includes 3 exclusive chapter videos to deepen each lesson. Written by Surreal Mind, 236 pages, beautifully designed 8.5 by 11 downloadable ebook, in stock now. Start your training today. Feel deeply while thinking clearly. Get The Alchemist's Path at thesurrealmind.com. Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension.